In New Jersey, after his kid finally falls asleep, a dad opens his laptop. The World Cup is coming to America. Not a 5 a.m. game on TV from the other side of the world. Here. Close enough that he could actually drive to the stadium. And look, he knows big games are expensive. He's an American sports fan. Super Bowl tickets are insane. Playoff tickets hurt. He gets it. But he's not trying to buy the final. He's not looking at a knockout game. It's one group stage match, high up in the stadium. The kind of seat that's supposed to be the compromise. In his head, maybe it's a few $100 for 2 seats. Painful, but doable. A day his kid remembers. Then the price loads. He stops, scrolls back up, checks the match again because maybe he clicked the wrong thing. He didn't. And that's the strange part. This isn't the biggest game. It isn't the best seat. It's the kind of ticket that used to be the way ordinary fans got in. Now even that feels out of reach. And he's not imagining it. 4 years ago in Qatar, an international fan could get into a group match for about $70. For 2026, group stage tickets started around $140. And since the price moves with demand now, seats for the hotter matchups have been listed past $2,000. Then look at the final, and the gap just gets absurd. According to Reuters, official face value for the 2026 final runs from about $2,000 to over $6,000. The 2022 final in Qatar, somewhere around $200 to $1,600. So the cheapest official seat at the next final costs more than the priciest seat at the last one. Bottom of the ladder to the top. The whole thing lifted up. Now the easy answer is FIFA got greedy. Or America's just expensive. There's a grain of truth in both. And neither one actually explains anything. Because the World Cup has been one of the most valuable events on Earth for 50 years. And for most of that time, this seat was cheap. So the real question isn't, why is FIFA charging so much? It's a longer one. What exactly has the World Cup been selling all these years? And to whom? Because that price on his screen is the last line on a 70-year list. And once you've seen the whole list, the number stops being shocking. It starts making perfect. Go back to the start, and the World Cup wasn't selling anything you could really put a price on. In the early days, teams literally crossed oceans by boat to take part, carrying their countries with them, chasing a small gold trophy. No sponsor tiers, no broadcast contracts, no notion that this was a product. What it offered was simpler and bigger than money. For 90 minutes, your nation was out there on the field, and the result felt like it belonged to everyone watching. You want to know what that was worth? Rio de Janeiro, July of 1950. Brazil versus Uruguay at the Maracanã. An official crowd of about 174,000. Still a record for a World Cup match 75 years on. Brazil only needed a draw. The whole country had already decided it was a party. Then Uruguay scored, and won. And the silence that dropped over that stadium became one of the most famous moments in the sport. They gave it a name, the Maracanazo, and Brazilians were still talking about it generations later. That's what a ticket bought back then, not a seat, a place inside a nation's memory. The emotion was already enormous. The money just hadn't shown up yet. The thing that turned all that feeling into money was television. At the 1954 World Cup in Switzerland, 9 matches went out live across borders for the first time. Tiny by today's standards, but something fundamental had shifted. The match didn't need you in the stadium anymore. It could come to you. And once it could travel, the audience stopped being 100,000 people in one city. It became a number with no ceiling. In just over 30 years, the world went from 30 million TV sets to more than 650 million. Same match, same minute. A bar in Mexico City, a living room in Lagos, a dorm in Seoul. But here's the catch that took FIFA years to crack. Attention isn't automatically money. Hundreds of millions of people were watching. for free. The crowd had shown up, and nobody had figured out how to charge for getting at it. That was the puzzle sitting there at the start of the 70s. The guy who cracked it took over in 1974. João Havelange, a businessman from Brazil, and the first FIFA president in history from outside Europe. He ran the place for 24 years, and under him, FIFA stopped acting like a sports federation and started acting like a company. TV rights, marketing deals, a global sponsor program. Havelange and a new breed of sports marketing operators looked at that giant free audience and they saw inventory. Watch one thing and you get the whole shift. The Coca-Cola boards along the edge of the pitch. Coke had been advertising at World Cup grounds since around 1950, but its formal deal with FIFA started in '74, and by '78, it was an official sponsor. Here's what changed in between. A board by the pitch used to be a sign a few thousand people in the stadium could see. Now the camera carried it. Every time the ball rolled to that side, the logo went out through the broadcast into hundreds of millions of living rooms. The sponsor wasn't buying a sign anymore. It was buying a seat inside the world's attention. And that's the third thing the World Cup learned to sell. Not belonging, not just eyeballs. Access to those eyeballs. Rented out by the tournament to the highest corporate bidder. Once that worked, governments noticed something too. If the whole planet's watching, then hosting the World Cup isn't just putting on a tournament, it's renting the world's eyes for a month. Think about what a host actually broadcasts. The gleaming new airport, the opening ceremony flyover of the skyline, the trains running on time, the stadium that didn't exist 3 years ago. For 1 month, a country gets to direct its own highlight reel, and the planet watches. And that turned the right to host into something genuinely valuable, a prize worth lobbying for, spending billions for, and, as it turned out, worth a whole lot more than that. And this is where the story turns dark. Because once something's that valuable, people start paying for it under the table. For years, that was just a rumor that trailed FIFA around. Then, in May of 2015, it stopped being a rumor. U.S. prosecutors, the FBI, and the IRS unsealed an indictment, and at dawn, Swiss police walked into a luxury hotel in Zurich and arrested FIFA officials. Some of them let out with bedsheets held over their faces. 14 people were charged, over bribes worth more than $150 million, going back to the early 90s. So step back and look at the list. Belonging, sold to fans. Attention, sold to television. Access, sold to sponsors. Image, sold to host governments. The hosting rights themselves, traded in the dark. Through every one of those stages, there was one thing FIFA still hadn't fully cashed in. The cheapest, most basic product of the lot. The seat. The actual fan in the actual stadium. And for decades, that seat stayed cheap on purpose. Because it wasn't the business. It was the production value. A broadcast needs a full, loud, ecstatic stadium. And you don't get that by pricing ordinary people out. The fans in the stands weren't the customers. They were the set. But FIFA could always see the money it was leaving on the table, because somebody else was scooping it up. Every tournament, a $35 ticket changed hands outside the gates for many times that. Scalpers, brokers, middlemen, all getting rich off one simple gap. The difference between what FIFA charged and what fans would actually pay. Every resold ticket was proof the money was real. It just wasn't FIFA's. So the only question left was, who'd finally capture that gap? And the tool to do it was getting perfected on the other side of the Atlantic. America had spent decades building the most advanced live event pricing system on Earth. Airlines learned to charge every passenger in a row a different price. Ticketmaster and the concert business turned moving prices into something Americans grumble about and pay anyway. The Super Bowl proved corporate America will pay almost anything for one scarce live moment. For a big event, there's no such thing as a real price. There's only what the market says today. And the World Cup started testing it. 2014, Brazil. The cheapest ticket for international fans jumped to $90. 2018, Russia. 105. That floor, untouched for decades, had started to rise. Still fixed numbers on a chart, though. The full machine needed the right market. And in 2026, it got one. And if you want to see that machine in its purest form, look at what's happening in American sports as I record this. The NBA Finals are on right now. The Knicks back in the finals for the first time since the 90s against the Spurs. Before Game 3, with New York looking like they might clinch the title at home, the get-in price for the next home game shot past $13,000. Then the Knicks lost that game. Title at home? Gone. And within 4 days, that same get-in price collapsed by more than $10,000. Same arena, same seats, same two teams. The only thing that moved was how badly people suddenly needed to be in the room. In 2026, the whole American playbook arrived at once. Dynamic pricing, an official resale platform that takes 15% off the seller and 15% off the buyer. Hospitality tiers stacked on top of the regular seats. Economists have a plain name for the engine under all this: price discrimination. And America is the perfect place to run that engine, because the ceiling here is absurdly high. The three host countries hold roughly 200,000 people each, worth over $30 million. The algorithm doesn't need the dad in New Jersey to hit its targets. It just needs to find the top of the room. And that's the truth sitting right under the ticket page. One soccer economist recently ran the numbers. Adjusted for inflation, the average World Cup ticket in America has gone up about 1,000% since 1994, roughly 11 times the price after inflation. Over that same stretch, median American household income rose 32%. Read that again. 1,000% against 32. The seat didn't outrun inflation, and it didn't outrun costs. It outran the ordinary fan. Its price stopped tracking what a normal family earns and started tracking what the richest sliver of the richest market on Earth will pay. FIFA didn't suddenly turn greedy. It finally got the tools, and the country, to harvest a gap scalpers had been proving was there for 50 years. But here's the part that should stay with you. Look back at everything on that 70-year list. Belonging, attention, image, hosting rights, the seat itself. Underneath every single one of them, FIFA was really selling the same thing: how much people care. The reason a World Cup ticket can run $5,000 is exactly that it was never just a ticket. Nobody pays that for a neutral product. They pay it for their country, for a childhood memory, for the chance to say, "I was there." The fans poured the emotion in. The system learned to meter it. And that's the quiet, uncomfortable engine under this whole story. The more real the feeling, the more valuable it gets. And the more valuable it gets, the more it prices out the very people whose feeling made it worth anything in the first place. So back to that dad at the laptop. Maybe he buys the tickets anyway. It's the World Cup. How many shots do you get at taking your kid? Or maybe he closes the tab and finds his World Cup the way most of the planet always has. A packed bar, a couch, the street, $50 for the night instead of whatever that checkout page was asking. And here's the thing. Either way, emotionally, the tournament is still his. It still belongs to everyone. That part hasn't changed since the Maracana. What changed is that the feeling now comes with a price tag, and the seat closest to the game goes to whoever can pay the most for it. The World Cup is still the people's game. You just have to check which tier you can afford. If you got something out of this, like and subscribe. And if you've got a take, drop it in the comments. Thanks for watching Signal Asia.